Hello and good afternoon. This is day 5. I think I'm starting to lose track again. To while we stall for time to wait for 3:02 to roll around. I've been working on my film again today, which I've gone through many stages, all of which y'all have seen. But I'm trying to find music to set it to. Because it's hello, Dane. I don't no, because letters were day 0. Wait, no, you're right, because we combined 2 chapters, so this is day 4. You're right. I'll start by Smash Mouth. I don't think it's gonna work. As much as I would love to do I'll start by Smash Mouth, I have a feeling that mayhaps that's not the tone I'm trying to hit. But I'm trying to find a song because otherwise it's like 6 minutes of nothing, and it's just not interesting enough. I've been looking at Rufus Wainwright stuff. I'm not gonna lie to you, Shivank. I love Rufus Wainwright. He's my favorite artist. You guys, you're not being helpful. But I've been trying to figure out a song to do. So if anybody knows any haunting folk songs, let me know because I'm stuck and I've tried so many songs, but something has to go in it and I just can't figure out what has to go in it. Will o' the Wainsbury? Willie o' the I can't tell if you're joking or not because I'm gonna look that up. I need help desperately. Here, I'm pulling out my notepad so I can write this down because I've literally tried so hard to find something and I've like sung songs and I've put songs in and I've looked all over the internet and I just can't find anything that works. And otherwise it's just going to be quiet and that's not very interesting. I just think it needs to be the length that it is, I think, and I don't know what I would cut, but it's boring. So SOS. Okay, so what happened yesterday in Frankenstein? Not a lot happened. So Frankenstein went off to college. His mom dies and he goes off to college and he's like only reads these like classical scholars of science. And one of his professors is like, "That's dumb. Why are you doing that?" And he's like, "Me? Dumb? Never." And so then he goes to another professor and the other professors were like, "Well, that is kind of dumb, but like I see what you're talking about." And so he gets really into school. Like he gets really good at school. He doesn't go home for years. And then he's like, and then I figured out how to create. Oh, hold on. I stopped. Okay, I'm back. Then he's like, and then I figured out how to create life. And everyone's like, "Oh, Victor, no. No, Victor, you don't want that." So he's figured out how to create life on his lonesome. He's been doing some light grave robbery. Sorry, I'm like, never mind. He's been doing some light grave robbery, some light post-mortem butchery, and he has basically he thinks he's hot shit, and of course he's like telling a story behind. So he's like, "Listen, I'm not hot shit, but I thought I was hot shit, but I'm not, but I thought I was." So anyways, Frankenstein has made some bad decisions and he's about to make the worst decision of his life, but maybe it'll be a good decision for us, but a very bad decision for him. A good decision for gothic horror as a genre and a terrible decision for Victor Frankenstein. He reminds me of Hamlet and I don't like Hamlet. All right, let's do this. Frankenstein, Chapter 4. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 a.m. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful, great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscle and arteries beneath. His hair was of lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. I know, it just happened. We were like, nothing happened, and then all of a sudden, it's alive, baby. um, Interesting. At length, lassitude succeeded to tumult I had before endured, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was vain. It was in vain. I slept indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth, in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead, my teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed when, by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. Now, Frankenstein, did you just create life and we're like, all right, I think I'm going to go take a nap? What happened? Didn't you, like, I don't know, man. Where was I? He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped, and rushed down the stairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound, as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. Oh, no mortal could support the horror of that countenance. A mummy again endued with animation could not be so hideous as that wretch. I had gazed on him while unfinished. He was ugly then. But when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such as even Dante could not have conceived. I passed the night wretchedly. Sometimes my pulse beat so quickly and hardly that I felt the palpitation of every artery. At others, I nearly sank to the ground through languor and extreme weakness. Mingled with this horror, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest for so long a space were now become a hell to me, and the change was so rapid and the overthrow so complete. Morning, dismal and wet, at length dawned, and discovered to my sleeplessness and aching eyes the church of Lugolstadt. Oh God, Lugolstadt, its white steeple and clock which indicated the 6th hour. The porter opened the gates of the court, which had that night been my asylum, and I issued into the streets, pacing them with quick steps, as if I sought to avoid the wretch whom I feared every turning of the street would present to my view. I did not dare return to the apartment which I inhabited, but felt impelled to hurry on, although wetted by the rain, which poured from a black and comfortless sky. I continued walking in this manner for some time, endeavoring by bodily exercise to ease the load that weighed upon my mind. Excuse me. I traversed the streets without any clear conception of where I was or what I was doing. My heart palpitated in the sickness of fear, and I hurried on with irregular steps, not daring to look about me. Okay, this is a quotation from Coleridge's Coleridge's Ancient Mariner. She just kind of dropped it in there, like I'm supposed to know what it means or who it's by, but I'll go with it. Like one who on a lonely road doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned round walks on, and turns no more his lead, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. Continuing thus, I came at length opposite to the inn at which the various diligences and carriages usually stopped. Here I paused, I knew not why, but I remained some minutes with my eyes fixed on a coach that was coming towards me from the other end of the street. As it drew near, I observed that it was the Swiss diligence. It stopped just where I was standing, and on the door being opened, I perceived Henry Clerval, who, on seeing me, instantly sprung out. "My dear Frankenstein," exclaimed he, "how glad I am to see you! How fortunate that you should be here at the very moment of my alighting!" Nothing could equal my delight on seeing Clerval. His presence brought back to my thoughts my father, Elizabeth, and all those scenes of home so dear to my recollection. I grasped his hand and in a moment forgot my horror and misfortune. I felt suddenly, and for the first time during many months, calm and serene joy. I welcomed my friend, therefore, in the most cordial manner, and we walked towards my college. Clerval continued for some time about our mutual friends, and his own good fortune in being permitted to come to Ingolstadt. "You may easily believe," said he, "how great was the difficulty to persuade my father that it was not absolutely necessary for a merchant not to understand anything except bookkeeping, and indeed, I believe I left him incredulous to the last, for his constant answer to my unwearied entreaties was the same as that of the Dutch schoolmaster in the Vicar of Wakefield. 'I have a thousand florins a year without Greek. I eat heartily without Greek.'" What does that mean, Mary? I'm not a scholar. "But his affection for me at length overcame his dislike of learning, and he has permitted me to undertake a voyage of discovery to the land of knowledge." Oh shit, now I have to choose a voice for Frankenstein. Um, "It gives me the greatest delight to see you, but tell me how you left my father, brothers, and Elizabeth." "Well, oh shit. Very well and very happy, only a little uneasy that they hear from you so seldom. By the by, I mean to lecture you a little upon their account myself. But, my dear Frankenstein," continued he, stopping short and gazing full in my face, "I did not before remark how very ill you appear, so thin and pale. You look as if you had been watching for several nights." "You have guessed right. I have lately been so deeply engaged in one occupation that I have not allowed myself sufficient rest, as you see. But I sincerely hope that all these employments are now at an end, and that I am at length free." Wait, what do you mean which one is Frankenstein? Frankenstein is the one that sounds more like me, and Clerval is the one who sounds less. I'm trying to do a deeper voice, but they're both men, and I'm having trouble. And I don't think Clerval is a dummy, so I can't do anything super funny. I trembled excessively. I could not endure to think of, and far less to allude to the occurrences of the preceding night. I walked with a quick pace, and we soon arrived at my college. I then reflected, and the thought made me shiver, that the creature whom I left in my apartment might still be there, alive and walking about. I dreaded to behold this monster, but I feared still more that Henry should see him. Entreating him, therefore, to remain a few minutes at the bottom of the stairs, I darted up towards my own room. My hand was already on the lock of the door before I recollected myself. I then paused, and a cold shivering came over me. I threw the door forcibly open, as children are accustomed to do when they expect a spectre to stand in waiting for them on the other side, but nothing appeared. I stepped fearfully in. The apartment was empty, and my bedroom was also freed from its hideous guest. I could hardly believe that so great a good fortune could have befallen me. But when I became assured that my enemy had indeed fled, I clapped my hands for joy and ran down to Clerval. We ascended into my room, and the servant presently brought breakfast. But I was unable to contain myself. It was not joy only that possessed me. I felt my flesh tingle with excess of sensitiveness, and my pulse beat rapidly. I was unable to remain for a single instant in the same place. I jumped over the chairs, clapped my hands, and laughed aloud. Clerval at first attributed my unusual spirits to joy on his arrival, but when he observed me more attentively, he saw with a wildness in my eyes for which he could not account, and my loud, unrestrained, heartless laughter frightened and astonished him. "My dear Victor," cried he, "what for God's sake is the matter? Do not laugh in that manner. How ill you are! What is the cause of all this?" "Do not ask me," cried I, putting my hands before my eyes, for I thought I saw the dreaded spectre glide into the room. "He can tell. Oh, save me, save me!" I imagined that the monster seized me. I struggled furiously and fell down in a fit. Poor Clerval. What must have his feelings been? What must have been his feelings? A meeting which he anticipated with such joy so strangely turned to bitterness. But I was not the witness of his grief, for I was lifeless and did not recover my senses for a long, long time. This was the commencement of a nervous fever which confined me for several months. Jesus! During all that time, Henry was my only nurse. I afterwards learned that, knowing my father's advanced age and unfitness for so long a journey, and how wretched my sickness would make Elizabeth, I think it must be he spared them, but it's spelled be spared them. He spared them this grief by concealing the extent of my disorder. He knew that I could not have a more kind and attentive nurse than himself, and firm in the hope that he felt, and firm in the hope he felt of my recovery, he did not doubt that, instead of doing harm, he performed the kindest action that he could towards them. But I was in reality very ill, and surely nothing but the unbounded and unremitting attentions of my friend could have restored me to life. The form of the monster on whom I had bestowed existence was forever before my eyes, and I raved incessantly concerning him. Doubtless my words surprised Henry. He had first believed them to be the wanderings of my disturbed imagination, but the pertinacity with which I continually recurred to the same subject persuaded him that my disorder indeed owed its origin to some uncommon and terrible event. By very slow degrees and with frequent relapses that alarmed and grieved my friend, I recovered. I remember the first time I became capable of observing outward objects with any kind of pleasure. I perceived that the fallen leaves had disappeared, and that the young buds were shooting forth from the trees that shaded my window. It was a divine spring, and the season contributed greatly to my convalescence. I felt also sentiments of joy and affection revive in my bosom. My gloom disappeared, and in a short time I became as cheerful as before I was attacked by the fatal passion. "Dearest Clerval," exclaimed I, "how kind, how very good you are to me. This whole winter, instead of being spent in study as you promised yourself, has been consumed in my sick room. How shall I ever repay you? I feel the greatest remorse for the disappointment of which I have been the occasion, but you will forgive me." "You will repay me entirely if you do not discompose yourself. But get well as fast as you can, and since you appear in such good spirits, I may speak to you on one subject, may I not?" I trembled. One subject? What could it be? Could he allude to an object on whom I dared not even think? "Compose yourself," said Clerval, who observed my change of color. "I will not mention it if it agitates you. But your father and cousin would be very happy if they received a letter from you in your own handwriting. They hardly know how ill you have been, and are uneasy at your long silence." "Is that all, my dear Henry? How could you suppose that my first thought would not fly towards these dear, dear friends whom I love, and who are so deserving of my love? It is your present temper, my friend. You will perhaps be glad to see a letter that has been lying here some days for you. It is from your cousin, I believe." I want this to turn into a romance. Maybe this would save it for me. I need some good old-fashioned smooching to get me through. Okay, sorry, that was the end of the chapter. I didn't just wax poetic. Oh dear Lord. Trying to decide if we should Chapters are about 3 pages long. Takes me about 15 minutes a page. Should I do another? That's what Victor really needs. I propose an edit to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Victor and the Monster Kiss. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, let's do it. Let's do it. Woo, woo. Chapter 5. Clariville then put the following letter into my hands. To Victor Frankenstein, my dear cousin, I cannot describe to you the uneasiness we have all felt concerning your health. We cannot help imagining that your friend Clariville conceals the extent of your disorder, for it is now several months since we have seen your handwriting, and all this time you have been obliged to dictate your letters to Henry. Surely, Victor, you must have been exceedingly ill, and this makes us all very wretched, as much so nearly as after the death of your dear mother. My uncle was almost persuaded that you were indeed dangerously ill, and could hardly be restrained from undertaking a journey to Ingolstadt. Clariville always writes that you are getting better. I eagerly hope that you will confirm this intelligence soon in your own handwriting, for indeed, Victor, we are all very miserable on this account. Relieve us from this fear, and we shall be the happiest creatures in the world. Your father's health is now so vigorous that he appears 10 years younger since last winter. Ernest also is much improved, that you would hardly know him. He is nearly 16 and has lost that sickly appearance which he had some years ago. He has grown quite robust and active. My uncle and I conversed a long time last night about what profession Ernest should follow. His constant illness when young has deprived him of the habits of application, and now that he enjoys good health, he is continually in the open air, climbing the hills or rowing on the lake. I therefore propose that he should be a farmer, which, you know, cousin, is a favorite scheme of mine. A farmer is a very healthy, happy life, and the least hurtful, or rather the most beneficial profession of any. God, Elizabeth, now I want to be a beet farmer again. My uncle had the idea of his being educated as an advocate, that through his interest he might become a judge, but besides that, he is not at all fitted for such an occupation. It is certainly more creditable to cultivate the earth for the sustenance of man than to be the confidant and sometimes the accomplice of his vices, which is the profession of a lawyer. I said that the employments of a prosperous farmer, if they were not a more honorable, they were at least a happier species of occupation than that of a judge, whose misfortune was always to meddle with the dark side of human nature. Oh, buddy, if you only knew what your boy Victor is getting up to in Ingolstadt. My uncle smiled and said that I thought to be an advocate myself, which put an end to the conversation on the subject. And now I must tell you a little story that will please and perhaps amuse you. Do you not remember Justine Moritz? Probably you do not, but I will relate her history, therefore, in a few words. Madame Moritz, her mother, was a widow with 4 children, of whom Justine was the third. This girl had always been the favorite of her mother, but through a strange perversity, her mother could not endure her, and after the death of Madame Moritz, treated her very ill. Uh-oh. I'm sorry, I lost it. Oh, my aunt observed this, and when Justine was 12 years of age, prevailed on her mother to allow her to live at her house. The republican institutions of our country have produced simpler and happier manners than those which prevail in the greatest monarchies that surround it. Hence there is less distinction between the several classes of its inhabitants, and the lower orders being neither so poor nor so despised, their manners are more refined and moral. A servant at Geneva does not mean the same thing as a servant in France and England. Justine, thus received in our family, learned the duties of a servant, a condition which, in our fortunate country, does not include the idea of ignorance and a sacrifice of the dignity of a human being. After what I have said, I dare say you will remember the heroine of my favorite little tale. For Justine was a great favorite of yours, and I recollect you once remarked that if you were in ill humor, one glance from Justine could dissipate it, for the same reason that Ariosto, she keeps mentioning all these Greek philosophers, and let me tell you, I've got not a clue who these people are. Ariosto. That's like a new type of pasta, an undiscovered pasta. Sorry. For the same reason that Oh, fuck, I just figured it out. Okay, listen, Talia. Some of us are but meager film majors. All I know is C stands and lie. um, the same reason that Arias Ariosto gives concerning I can't do it. The beauty of Angelica. She looks so frank-hearted and happy. My aunt conceived a great attachment for her, by which she was induced to give her an education superior to that which she had at first intended. This benefit was fully repaid. Justine was the most grateful little creature in the world. I do not mean that she made any professions. I have never heard one pass her lips, but you could see by her eyes that she almost adored her protectress. Although her disposition was gay, and in many respects inconsiderate, yet she paid the greatest attention to every gesture of my aunt. She thought her the model of all excellence and endeavored to imitate her phraseology and manners, so that even now she often reminds me of her. um, when my dearest aunt died, everyone was too much occupied in their own grief to notice poor Justine, who had attended her during her illness with the most anxious affection. Poor Justine was very ill, but other trials were reserved for her. One by one, her brothers and sister died, and her mother, with the exception of her neglected daughter, was left childless. The conscience of the woman was troubled. She began to think that the deaths of her favorites was a judgment from heaven to chastise her partiality. She was a Roman Catholic, and I believe her confessor confirmed the idea which she had conceived. Accordingly, a few months after her departure from Ingolstadt, Justine was called home by her repentant mother. Poor girl! She wept when she quitted our house. She was much altered since the death of my aunt. Grief had given softness and a winning mildness to her manners, which had before been remarkable for vivacity. Nor was her residence at her mother's house of nature to restore her gaiety. The poor woman was very vacillating in her repentance. She sometimes begged Justine to forgive her unkindness, but much oftener accused her of having caused the deaths of her brothers and sister. Perpetual fretting at length drew Madame Moritz into a decline, which at first increased her irritability, but she is now at peace forever. She died on the first approach of cold weather, and at the beginning of this last winter. Justine has returned to us, and I assure you I love her tenderly. She is very clever and gentle and extremely pretty. I mentioned before, her mind and her expressions continually remind me of my dear aunt. She's like, "Hey, Frankenstein, I know this story that will cheer you up. Remember that servant girl you thought was hot? Well, her whole family died, and now she's back with us. Are you cheered up much? I must also say a few words to you, my dear cousin of little darling William. I wish you could see him. He is very tall of his age, with sweet laughing blue eyes, dark eyelashes, and curling hair. When he smiles, two little dimples appear on each cheek, which are rosy with health. He has already one or two little wives, but Louisa Byron is his favorite, a pretty little girl of 5 years of age. Now, dear Victor, I dare say you wish to be indulged in a little gossip concerning the good people of Geneva. The pretty Miss Mansfield has already received the congratulatory visits on her approaching marriage with a young Englishman, John Melbourne, Esquire. Her ugly sister, Manon, married Master Duvillard, the rich banker, last autumn. Your favorite schoolfellow, Louis Manoir. Ooh, I only know that one because of film noir. Louis Manoir has suffered several misfortunes since the departure of Clerval from Geneva. Is everyone in love with Clerval? But he has already recovered his spirits and is reported to be on the point of marrying a very lively, pretty Frenchwoman, Madame Travenier. She is a widow and much older than Manoir, but she is very much admired and a favorite with everybody. I have written myself into good spirits, dear cousin, yet I cannot conclude without again anxiously inquiring concerning your health. Dear Victor, if you are not very ill, write yourself and make your father and all of us happy, or I cannot bear to think of the other side of the question. My tears already flow. Adieu, my dearest cousin. Elizabeth Lavenza, Geneva, March 18th, 17 something. Can anyone what's the deets on what that means? Is that 17 just 1700 straight, or she was I don't want to choose a date? Let me know. Clerval is spelled Clerval, Erval, and that was just the best I could do with it. Clerval, maybe? Dear, dear Elizabeth, I exclaimed when I read her letter. I will write instantly and relieve them from the anxiety they must feel. I wrote, and this exertion greatly fatigued me. But my convalescence had commenced and proceeded regularly. In another fortnight, I was able to leave my chamber. One of my first duties on my recovery was to introduce Clerval to the several professors of the university. In doing this, I underwent a kind of rough usage, ill-befitting the wounds that my mind had sustained. Do you even have, like, the slightest bit of a question? You're like, I created life, and then I just kind of loosed it into the world, and, like, I'm not too worried about that. I feel like my first move would be like, hey, has anybody seen anything weird lately? But I guess not, Victor. Have your fun. Has anyone seen an 8-foot-tall man walking around? Hard to miss. Damn. Oh, ever since the fatal night, the end of my labors, and the beginning of my misfortunes, I had conceived a violent antipathy, even to the name of natural philosophy. When I was otherwise quite restored to health, the sight of a chemical instrument would renew all the agony of my like, God, not that beaker. A chemical instrument would renew all the agony of my nervous symptoms. Me passing out upon seeing a beaker. I'm sorry. I should be more serious about this. Henry saw this and had removed all apparatus from my view. He'd also changed my apartment, for he perceived that I had acquired a dislike for the room, which had previously been my laboratory. But these cares of Clerval were made of no avail when I visited the professors. Visited the professors. Master Waldman inflicted torture when he praised, with kindness and warmth, the astonishing progress I had made in the sciences. I'm so sorry. I can't believe this guy isn't like a little bit worried about where his creature went. He soon perceived that I disliked the subject, but not guessing the real cause, he attributed my feelings to modesty and changed the subject from my improvement to the science itself, with a desire, as I evidently saw, of drawing me out. What could I do? He meant to please, and he tormented me. I felt as if he had placed carefully, one by one, in my view, those instruments which were to be afterwards used in putting me to a slow and cruel death. I writhed under his words, yet dared not exhibit the pain I felt. Clerval, whose eyes and feelings were always quick in discerning the sensations of others, declined the subject, alleging in excuse his total ignorance, and the conversation took a more general turn. I thanked my friend from my heart, but did not speak. I saw plainly that he was surprised, but he never attempted to draw my secret from me. And although I loved him with a mixture of affection and reverence that knew no bounds, Victor? Yet I could never persuade myself to confide to him the event which was so often present to my recollection, but which I feared the detail to another would only impress more deeply. Master Krempe was not equally docile, and in my condition at that time, of almost insupportable sensitiveness, his harsh, blunt encomiums gave me even more pain than the benevolent approbation of Master Waldman. Oh, look, she did the Twitter thing where she like blocked out the letters. Nothing happened. There's nothing of interest here. Damn the fellow, cried he. Why, I don't know who this is. Master Clerval, I assure you he has outstripped us all. Aye, stare if you please, but it is nevertheless true. A youngster who, but a few years ago, believed Cornelius Agrippa as firmly as the gospel, has now set himself at the head of the university, and if he is not soon pulled down, we shall be out of countenance. Aye, continued he, observing my face expressive of suffering, Master Frankenstein is modest, an excellent quality in a young man. Is he modest, though? He did try to create life. Young men should be diffident of themselves, you know, Master Clerval. I was myself when young, but that wears out in a very short time. Master Crump had now commenced a eulogy on himself, which happily turned the conversation from a subject that was so annoying to me. Clerval was no natural philosopher. His imagination was too vivid for the minutiae of science. Languages were his principal study, and he sought, by acquiring their elements, to open a field for self instruction on his return to Geneva. Persian, Arabic, and Hebrew gained his attention, after he had made himself perfectly master of Greek and Latin. For my own part, idleness had ever been irksome to me, and now that I wished to fly from reflection and hated my former studies, I felt great relief in being the fellow pupil with my friend, and found not only instruction but consolation in the works of the Orientalists. I'm a little worried. I don't know what that means. Their melancholy is. I'm worried. Their melancholy is soothing, and their joy elevating to a degree I never experienced in studying the authors of any other country. When you read their writings, life appears to consist in a warm sun and a garden of roses, in the smiles and frowns of a fair enemy, and the fire that consumes your own heart. How different from the manly and heroical poetry of Greece and Rome. Okay, that's messed up. Frankenstein. Check yourself. Summer passed away in these occupations, and my return to Geneva was fixed for the latter end of autumn. But being delayed by several accidents, winter and snow arrived, the roads were deemed impassable, and my journey was delayed until the ensuing spring. I felt this delay very bitterly, for I longed to see my native town and my beloved friends. My return had only been delayed so long from an unwillingness to leave Clairville in a strange place before he had become acquainted with any of its inhabitants. The winter, however, was spent cheerfully, and although the spring was uncommonly late, when it came its beauty compensated for its dilatoriness. The month of May had already commenced, and I expected a letter daily which was to fix the date of my departure, when Henry proposed a pedestrian tour in the environs of Ingolstadt, that I might bid a personal farewell to the country I had so long inhabited. I acceded with pleasure to this proposition. I was fond of exercise, and Clairville had always been my favorite companion in the rambles of this country that I had taken among the scenes of my native country. I think I meant rambles of this nature, but sometimes I get confused by the line down. I see them both at the same time and read that word instead. We passed a fortnight in these perambulations. My health and spirits had long been restored, and they had gained additional strength from the salubrious air I breathed, and the natural incidents of our progress, and the conversation of my friend. Study had before secluded me from the intercourse of my fellow creatures, and rendered me unsocial, but Clairville called forth the better feelings of my heart. He again taught me to love the aspect of nature, the cheerful faces of children. Excellent friend, how sincerely did you love me, and endeavor to elevate my mind until it was on a level with your own. A selfish pursuit had cramped and narrowed me, until your gentleness and affection warmed and opened my senses. I became the same happy creature who, a few years ago, loving and beloved by all, had no sorrow or care. This can't be good for Henry. When happy, inanimate nature had the power of bestowing on me the most delightful sensations. A serene sky and verdant fields filled me with ecstasy. The present season was indeed divine. The flowers of spring bloomed in the hedges, while those of summer were already in bud. I was undisturbed by thoughts which during my preceding year had pressed upon me, notwithstanding my endeavors to throw them off with an invincible burden. Henry rejoiced in my gaiety and sincerely sympathized in my feelings. He exerted himself to amuse me, while he expressed the sensations that filled his soul. The resources of his mind on this occasion were truly astonishing. His conversation was full of imagination, and very often, in imitation of the Persian and Arabic writers, he invented tales of wonderful fancy and passion. At other times, he repeated my favorite poems or drew me out into arguments which he supported with great ingenuity. We returned to our college on a Sunday afternoon. The peasants were dancing, and everyone we met appeared gay and happy. My own spirits were high, and I bounded along with feelings of unbridled joy and hilarity. That's the end of this chapter. Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs. Ooh, there's someone named Alphonse, I think that's his dad, in the next chapter. Frankenstein, I yet again am questioning all of your decisions. What, like, I can't believe what happened to the creature? Does anybody know? I assume we'll know. I'm not even sure if that's the monster at this point. Like, give me the monster. Bring on the spooks once again. Bring back the spooks. Make Frankenstein spooked again. That's what I want. He needs to get. That's all Frankenstein's ever seen in the book. The monster's ever seen in the book. Reading this has given me some insight into our perception of Frankenstein. Because I've only seen the original, like, Boris Karloff Frankenstein, and I saw Bride of Frankenstein as well. I got to see a really cool double feature at, I think, the Arrow in LA, which is just like, LA has so many cool theaters that show like movies that aren't in active distribution. I don't know if that's even a phrase. But I saw it at the Arrow, and it was so cool. But it's interesting because this book, the big scenes of the movie is the animation of Frankenstein, and it's just a like disregarded paragraph in the book. And so our perception of Frankenstein has been completely shaped by the films, the 30s film that has been made of it, which is so cool. But also strange. I don't know. I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of the book and seeing if more comes of it, because I think the monster is the main character of the movie pretty much, and it's good. I don't know. I'm missing him. Missing him, monster. Boo-hoo. All right. That's all for me today. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Yes. I had to check. Just a little side project. I will be in at 1 tomorrow, Tuesday. If anybody thinks of any folk songs, haunting folk songs, send them my way, because all I can think of is the song in the Hunger Games, and that's not very helpful to me. Yes, 1 again tomorrow. Was it not? Did I change it last Tuesday? I don't remember. All right. I'm signing off. I bid you adieu. Have pleasant dreams, unlike our boy Victor. See you soon tomorrow at 1. Goodbye. Thanks for tuning in. I love you all deeply.